blessing with our bodies. Blessing with
Oh.
our bodies. Now, you know, there's that line in the marriage vows where the man says, with my body I thee worship. And I don't know how many of us remember that line, or whether we feel worshipped. We feel worshipped when it comes to lovemaking. But blessing our partner with our bodies has to be one of the most beautiful, exciting,
exploding,
fulfilling aspects
act
of the marriage,
of
the marriage relationship.
Yeah.
And it should really be what sets our relationship apart from other relationships, because all that we have been speaking about just now, for the most part, all the things that we have been speaking about just now are things that can be applied to other relationships. We can apply them to our familial relationships. You know, in terms of the things we think about our family members, our parents, our siblings. There are things that I have said that can be applied in the context of the work relationship. You know, being nice to people, commending them, blessing them with our words, and so on. You know, the part about dwelling with them according to knowledge and they help me, well, that's unique to marriage. But definitely blessing with our bodies. What was that?
She said she didn't have that in her vows.
You didn't have that line in your vows? Right? But
call him one second.
You know, it's not too late, Sandra. Right? But yeah. Let's look at the responsibility of the male. When we think of, and we're going to look at both, okay, but I want to start with the male. My husband can chime in here. When we think of relationships, now I have a friend who often said to me, when we used to talk about sex a lot back in the day, it's a girlfriend, she would tell me things like, whenever you talk about sex between a man and a woman, you often talk about penetration. So the man is penetrating the woman, the man is seen as the giver and the woman as the receiver, you know. And maybe that goes back to our ideas of the missionary position of the man being on top and the woman at the bottom, although that's not the only position that they can have. But when we think of sex, we think of it in those terms, generally speaking. And even the legal language in terms of describing what happens, unfortunately, in acts like rape, still speak within the context of penetrative sex, right? The penetration of the vagina by the penis. And when we think of sex within that context, that puts the man up there as the giver and the woman as the receiver. But what my friend and I often recognize in our conversations is that very seldom do people speak of that sexual dynamic in terms of female envelopment. Let's put it that way. Remember, the woman is the one receiving. And we only hear about penetration, but we don't hear about envelopment. We don't hear about the fact that the woman envelops the giver, as it were. So the man is penetrating, but the woman is enveloping, right? And when we think of sex in that way, in both ways, not just in one, when we think of it in both ways, what that does is that begins to spread the responsibility in the act. And we begin to see that sex is not just about the man worshiping the woman with his body, if we have to go with the lines of those marital vows, which are pretty old, by the way. With my body I do worship, I'm worshiping you with my body. Then we see the woman as one who is also giving worship, if I could put it that way, as an act from her envelopment of the penetration, as it were. So that sex does not become a one-sided thing within the marriage context, where we see the man as the one who is primarily responsible for giving. I am penetrating her, so I am giving her pleasure. And if she fails to receive pleasure, it's because it's my fault. If she fails to be orgasmic, it's my fault because I am the penetrator, I am the giver, I'm the doer, and she's the receiver. And that old time way of viewing the sex act still exists among many people.
That's right.
I am telling you, I talk to couples, and this view of sex still exists a lot in today's world, where people still see the man as the giver and the woman as the receiver, and therefore he is primarily responsible for her pleasure. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't bear any responsibility in it, and that he should not be blessing her with his body, or as in the line of that from the wedding vows, worshiping her with his body. But I think that the woman is equally responsible, because if we go back to those two verses we spoke about earlier, where the word says he must dwell with her according to knowledge, which means he needs to know her really well. If he's going to understand her, he needs to know her well. He needs to spend time getting to know her. She needs to expose herself to him, and he needs to spend time getting to know her so he can understand her. That applies with the sex act as well. But in the same way that we saw that male responsibility in terms, or husband's responsibility in terms of dwelling with his wife according to knowledge, we also see a similar responsibility for the woman, who must be the help that is meet. Remember that is how Eve was described, as a help meet for Adam, a help suitable for Adam, or she was the woman who could provide Adam with what he required. What does that mean in terms of the sex act? What is a woman bringing? What are we as wives bringing to the bedroom? If we're doing it in the bedroom, you understand, I don't necessarily mean that literally. But what are we bringing to the marital relationship, the intimate sexual relationship of marriage? What are we bringing to that? That is what our spouse needs. What are we bringing that meets the specific need that he has? And if we go back to what I was saying just now when I introduced this topic about blessing with the body, I spoke about male penetration, but I spoke about female envelopment. And when I think about female envelopment, I am thinking that the woman is as engaged in the sex act as the man is in the sex act, right? I am thinking that the wife is not passive. The wife is not just waiting for her husband to give her pleasure. She's not passively laying down, waiting for him to give her enough pleasure for her to get an orgasm, but she is actively pursuing pleasure in the act itself. And in pursuing that pleasure on her own, or with him, along with him, but in terms of being actively involved in it herself, what she is doing in essence is that she is bringing a certain level of enthusiasm and interest to the act. And this is exactly what he needs, because remember, we spoke about the wife giving the husband the help that he needs. She is a help suitable for him. She provides him with what he needs. And I am sure if we as wives had to be honest, and we had to ask our husbands what they needed in the bedroom, that many of them would say that they needed an engaged wife, they needed an enthusiastic wife, they needed a wife that was into it, they needed a wife that wasn't just watching, standing by or lying by, you know, but that she was actively engaged in it. Now, I know I'm going to hear from you ladies. I know I will hear from you
Especially you,
ladies.
Sandra, because I saw you give an answer concerning a quote that was on Facebook. Who keeps the most noise? Are men silent?
Okay.
Some did it.
I didn't even say that.
Men being silent. You know, when things like that take place. You know.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm saying, I know I'm going to hear from the ladies who are going to say, well, there may be reasons why we are disengaged. If we are disengaged in the bedroom, there may be reasons why we're disengaged. We are uninterested, or we're We are passive because we are unhappy. We are disengaged because he is not meeting our need. He's not dwelling with us according to knowledge. So that is our response to not having our need met. And I am not speaking to those situations in terms of what I just said, because I understand that response. I understand the woman who is going to feel hurt, who is going to feel emotionally devastated because of something her partner has done or is not doing that she thinks he should be doing in the relationship. And as a result, her response to her partner's failure in this area of physical intimacy and physical engagement, her response is to disengage. Her response, I think when we did our book launch, I spoke about this because we were talking about being ready for love, right? And we were talking about readiness for love being a continuum, right? Being something that continues in the marriage. It isn't something that you just experience prior to marriage and then after that. But we were saying that you have to be continuously ready for love. And I think I was making a point that in the same way that men disengage emotionally when they think their needs aren't being met, a man may still have sex with his wife even if he's unhappy because he's fulfilling a physical need. So he may have sex with his wife even if he's emotionally unhappy, and men do have emotions, yes. He's emotionally unhappy, he's still having sex with his wife, but he is emotionally disengaged. So he doesn't tell her the nice things she wants to hear. There's no lovey-dovey talk. There's no I love you, babe, you're so sweet. There's none of that. There's just straight up sex. That's it. Good night. He is disengaged emotionally. But I was also saying that the woman disengages physically. All right? So she may go through the emotions and or she may not even go through the emotions. She may just be there. And she has disengaged physically because that is her way of dealing with the fact that her husband is emotionally absent. He's emotionally absent, so she becomes physically absent in response. And her physical absence may not be, I'm no longer going to have sex with you. She may have sex, but she's just there. Or she's barely engaged in it. She's not enjoying it. But this is not what the man needs. The man needs a wife who is going to be very engaged in the sex act, who is going to be very excited about it, who's going to be willing to experiment, who's going to be willing to, keep noise if she needs to, whatever makes her happy, But he wants that full engagement. He wants that full involvement because that is one of his primary needs, because he sees sex, even though a man can be emotionally disengaged during the sex act. And I will let my husband speak to this because he's a man. Even though a man may be emotionally disengaged in his sex act, when a man loves a woman,
and he loves sex,
when he loves a woman, I think he wants to have sex with that woman. Am I right?
So Sharon is saying being ready for love is vitally important, especially for a woman.
Yeah. So I don't know if you ever got what I said just now. What did I say just now? What was I saying? I said that even though a man may be emotionally disengaged during the sex act, in the sex act, he might just be having sex as a release. Whether he's doing that with his wife or if he's doing that with another woman, whatever. I'm talking in the context of marriage though, but you understand that men may have sex with other women and it's just a release thing. They're not emotionally engaged, although I have my thoughts about that. That's a whole other discussion. Because I personally don't believe you can have sex without emotional engagement. I think you can feel you're not having emotional engagement, but I think that is virtually impossible to have sex without emotional engagement. But that's another subject for another time. What I'm saying is a man may think he is just engaging his body, his penis in the sex act, and his heart isn't in it. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that when a man really loves a woman and she is the apple of his eye, that he really wants to have sex with her all the time. Is that true?
Of course.
You need to come into the picture.
Of course it is true. And I don't want to say who's testament to that, but of course it is true. When one thinks of the whole marriage, and I'm not talking about wedding, because wedding is only what you see and not necessarily what takes place after the wedding. But marriage is something in art. Let me put it this way. Sex is the glue that keeps the marriage welded together, strong, keep the marriage well oiled.
You tell I was just going to say that. If I had said it with you, we would have said it simultaneously. I was just going to say that. Well oiled. I was actually just going to say that.
See, she's always in my head.
Right. I honestly was just going to say that.
It has to be like that. So it is not something that I believe a man would be disengaged. He can disengage his brain from. Because remember, everything comes from the brain. So the mere fact that there's a need for sex, it comes from the brain. The brain is what controls the body, and not just the heart where the blood pumps. The brain has to speak to the heart to pump the blood so that things can start to
The brain
mesh.
is the control center.
It's the control center.
Yeah.
So I can't say that men are disengaged.
But I am talking about a man in a say there's a bad marriage or a bad relationship. There's no communication.
Man will still have sex.
He will still have sex, but he's having it, but
He's
not
engaged in the sex act.
But he's not telling her. It's not a whole thing. So he's not saying, "I love you, baby. You're sweet." There's no sweet. It's just like sex. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, and I believe that occurs in a lot of relationships. That if two persons are not speaking together, the mere fact that the act is there, they will go into the act, even though their brains are not there.
Even though their hearts are miles apart.
Even if their hearts are miles apart.
Right. Was that Rihanna's song, California King Bed? We're sleeping in the same bed, but we're miles apart. So yes, you can have that type of sex where it is just
But I'm not saying it's right.
It seems to be just a physical release. There seems to be, let's put it this way, there seems to be little emotional engagement. There are some challenges in the relationship, so you don't really discuss the challenges, but you're just having the sex. That can happen. That's not what I'm talking about. It can happen, right? But what I'm saying is, when we talk about with my body I thee worship, that's not the type of sex I'm seeing. I'm seeing a sex that is different.
I was just going to say, let's not look. When I first came into the church, as I heard people who were already married and talking, right? It was like, man, that's all he's want. That's what she would say.
Oh, the women would say that.
Yeah, that's all he's want. So I just give and let you go along.
Actually, when I was a young married woman, right? I was a young married woman in the church. A lot of my Christian girlfriends, a few of them, not a lot, a few of my Christian girlfriends who were also married, some of them said something similar. It was like, man, that's all he's want. If he's saying wrong, he got he got sex demons. Look at all he's want is sex.
Demon possessed. You got a sex demon.
There were some young ladies who said these kinds of things, to me, and I never said anything. I never said anything like that. Honestly, I didn't. I just thought in my innocent head that the male sex drive was an animal all by itself that I would never understand, and I continue to think that it is.
Is it?
And when I said I don't mean it negatively, I don't mean it in a bad way at all. My husband has a high sex drive, I would say, and I quite enjoy the fact that he has a high sex drive in the sense that even if I don't always feel like having sex, I always feel desired, and that's the truth. that is how our relationship is, because as long as we've been married for a long time. My husband still desires me sexually. I still desire him sexually. Obviously, as you get older, you may not be having sex as often as you did when you were younger, but he believes that he can, and I'm fine with that.
You see, the thing, I was just going to say, before my wife, I was just about to say, when you think of creation and God forming man from the dust of the ground, man came about and saw the animals and all these different things were already having mates. So what?
He didn't have anybody.
He didn't have any, so he's making up now.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, I had to tackle Dr. Anthony Cummings online. I don't know if he's watching. I had to tackle him because he had a post saying God created sex for procreation, and he don't know around with these people that are having sex 3 and 4 times a night. And I said to him, but that's not the case at all. There's nothing in the Bible that suggests that God only created sex for procreation, because when the Bible describes Eve being brought to Adam, you know, the first thing Adam said was, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman, because she was taken from man. So I honestly believe, and I tell people this all the time, I believe that the first thing Adam and Eve did after meeting each other was to have sex. I think that is what allowed him to say that this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. It was like what God gave to him, he possessed her back into himself, you know, because he would have seen the animals mating. He never had anybody like him to mate with, and as soon as he got his woman, I am sure that that was the very first thing he polished off to enable him to say, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Because when God brought the two of them together, that was the performance of the first marriage. And that is what concretizes the marital union, sex. So sex could never be just for the having of children, because what would that say for people who cannot have children?
I was just about to say
that would mean that they should never have sex, or that they should stop having it.
Yeah.
So there's nothing in the Bible to suggest that sex is only for having children. Certainly having children is an extremely important part of the sexual act, and it is what has enabled the survival of the species, the propagation of the human race, and the propagation of humanity, you know, has been allowed through the sex act. So that is an extremely important function. I don't mean to trivialize it in any way, but certainly the making of intimacy, the development of marital intimacy, that knowledge that we spoke of earlier when it said dwelling with your wives according to knowledge, and the fact that the Bible uses the word knowledge to describe the sex act, again solidifies that there is nothing as bearing to the human soul as engaging in sex. And that is why, while we're on this topic, let's talk about Krapova and the behavior of people in the streets, because I mean, Oyetoya Waldron wrote an extremely telling post today, to which I agreed, which I liked, when he spoke about the bounds of human decency that were constantly being challenged through what we are calling culture. And he talked about the fact that people were, you know, basically imitating the sex act through their behavior in the streets. And, you know, we can talk about African dance, we can talk about the movement of the hips as a part of African dance, and I have no issue with that within reason. But certainly what we are seeing in terms of the imitation of sex,
that's right,
where men are thrusting their groins into the backside of a woman who is bent over in nothing else but a thong, and we are not seeing that as something that is very sexual. We are really not being honest with ourselves, because that's what it is. It's like having sex with just a little bit of strings on, a little bit of clothes on, you know, and that certainly is behavior that should be reserved for the privacy of the bedroom, and not for public consumption, you know, unless we are in some grand national move to make pornography something that is national.
And it has even gone as far as abuse to children.
Exactly, when we saw the women encouraging boys, young boys, to do that to them. You know, the authorities really need to do something about that. That is not culture. It is certainly the anathema of culture. That behavior is reprehensible.
we're looking at the thoughts, words, body.
And we are at body.
We are at body.
And we are at body, and we're talking about worshiping with our body in the context of our marital relationship. And I spoke about the fact that a man needs that suitable help that the wife is going to provide. Is the wife being uninhibited in the bedroom, being freed in her mind, freed in her thoughts, so that she can be freed in her body. But this isn't a place that a woman can come to by herself. So even though I said all that I said earlier about the woman not being passive and not being just lying down there waiting for him to give her an orgasm, etc. While I said all of that, I don't discount that the man has a role to play in helping the woman to get to that space. Because but listen to what I'm saying. If the man is treating her bad, if a man is treating you bad, if your husband is treating you badly, he insults you, he doesn't spend time with you, y'all don't get a chance to talk, right? There's no intimacy in the relationship. I mean, like conversational intimacy, emotional intimacy. Y'all don't get to talk, y'all don't spend time together, y'all don't go out, nothing like that. But he just comes home, takes a shower, or maybe he doesn't. When you lie down in the bed next to him, he just jumps on you, Even if he attempts foreplay or whatever, that's not the point. The point is, you feel as if, to him, you are just a vagina.
Object.
And that is not what you want to feel like. Never mind what we see other women doing out there in the road. You don't want to feel like an object. You don't want to feel like a vagina. You want to feel like a whole person.
That's right.
You want to feel as if this man loves me for who I am. He appreciates my soul. He appreciates what I have to offer. He sees me as a whole person, as a brain, someone who thinks, someone who has feelings, who has emotions. And he wants to connect with me. Yes, physically, he wants to make love to me, but he wants to make love to all of me, not just my vagina. I think that many of us women in relationships, that is what we're looking for.
Good night, Harold. Harold Cumberbatch.
Hi, Harold. How are you? Nice to see you. That is what a woman is looking for. She's looking for her husband to love the entire person. We know that men fixate on body parts. We know that men love. Some of you love butts. Some of you love breasts. Some of you love your wife to have a big butt. You want her to have big breasts, and you love these parts of her body. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Because God made it that way.
Exactly. There's nothing. We are physically attracted to each other.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with wanting a part of your partner's body,
Susan say it again.
It is true. There's nothing wrong. Everybody that is my friend know that I love my husband's butt. He has a really wonderful butt, lovely shape.
Oh boy, there she goes.
I'm always tapping him on it. So there's nothing wrong with loving a part of your partner's body.
Anatomy.
Right? There's nothing wrong with having a favorite part of your partner's body that you love. And letting them know that, you can't keep your hands off of each other every time she passes, but you must pinch it, you must slap it, you must cuddle it, whatever. That's great, and that's great chemistry to have in your relationship. And that can only make things hotter, more heated.
Your friend is watching, Randy.
Hi, Randy. That can only make things more heated in the bedroom. So that's fine, right? But, Gabriel, if the relationship is not being nurtured, if there's no conversation, if we don't talk, and we don't have a thing, going, we don't have that sense of intimacy, that sense of specialness, we don't have that going on in our relationship, then when a man makes love to a woman within that context, she is going to feel used.
She's going to feel used.
She's going to feel that she's just a vagina being used, right? Now, I can introduce a flip side to this that some of you may be a bit uncomfortable with, right? You may be a bit uncomfortable with it, but I can introduce it nonetheless. When I first started blogging on relationships eons ago, probably around 2011, with my blog, which was then called Red Apples. It's now called Love Story 246. Same blog, but different name. When I first started blogging, I wrote an article which got a lot of international attention. It ended up even on other websites that I didn't necessarily send it to, I think. And it was called Why Women Love to Be Bitches in the Bedroom. Some of you may be offended by the word bitch, but I'm not necessarily offended by it. I understood the context in which I wrote the article. Why some women love to be bitches in the bedroom. And I was speaking about women who were abused, women who were accustomed to being treated a particular way by men, women who were used by men in their past relationships. Maybe it could have stemmed from abuse in childhood, abuse in adolescence. You know, sometimes they say women are abused and they end up in abusive relationships.
Yeah.
So they're accustomed to being treated badly. They're accustomed to being called names. They're being accustomed to being slapped around. And they learn about sex within the context of that type of relationship. They learn about sex from a space of relational deficit. They learn about sex within a space of emotional and sexual trauma. They may even experience sexual pleasure within that context.
Of course.
So if the first time you had an orgasm was with a man who used to slap you, who used to treat you bad, who used to call you names, right? What that does to your psyche and your sexual psyche is that it trains you to experience a sexual high within that context only. So you don't know how to be with a man who's going to treat you well. You don't know how to be with a man who's going to tell you nice things. You don't know how to be with a man who's going to say, I love you, you're beautiful. You don't know how to respond, how to live within that type of relationship, because you learned about sex and you experience sexual pleasure from the context of trauma, emotional and sexual trauma. And that more or less turns you into what I call loosely a bitch. A particular type of woman who behaves a particular type of way because she wants to feel used so that she can feel pleasure. That's a very complex psychological phenomenon, but it is true. That's what my article was about. That type of woman who has been sexually traumatized, whether through abuse, rape, abusive relationships, whatever, and even relational rape, you know, she came into her understanding of sexual pleasure within the context of those types of relationships. So as a result, she has been more or less spoiled, and she can only see herself within the context of that type of relationship. So whenever she's in the bedroom, in her mind, she must become a bitch. She must become that type of woman in order to feel sexual pleasure, right? And that's it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. It's very disconcerting, but it is true.
I think over the years, you know, we've come up hearing that a lot of women, and that's in the past. I don't know if it still happens today, but a lot of women used to say, if you don't love me,
if
you don't beat me,
he don't love me, right? That's an old Bajan saying.
That's an old Bajan
if he don't
saying.
beat me, he don't love me. So that's a very similar thing to what I'm talking about. Yeah, right. You learn about what you think love is, what you think good sex is. You learn about that within the context of emotional and sexual trauma. So
and that was abuse.
So which is abuse.
Yeah.
So you bring that now to your marriage. So you might meet a nice man who treats you well, and you might give in to that treatment. That nice treatment. He brings you flowers, he opens doors for you, he looks after you financially if you care to have that type of relationship, or he helps you. You know, he's there for you. He's a good man, right? But when it comes to your sexual relationship, for you to feel satisfied sexually, you have to become this other person in your head because of your experiences. And you might feel such deep shame, you never speak to your partner about it. You never tell your spouse that this is what you're going through.
So tell me, Han, how would someone come out of a situation like that? When you think of, let's take for example, the women on the streets, right, who would have multiple partners,
Yes.
relationships, right, and they find someone who loves them,
Yes.
right, and marry them.
Yeah.
How do they get out of that, knowing that for them in their heads, that's how they used to behave, and
Yes.
that's what used to. Well, I don't know if it used to satisfy, because some of them
May just have been doing it for the money and not looking for satisfaction. Yeah, most likely.
But to come
It's a
out
similar
of,
thing.
to come out of that type of, because here those persons, for me, I believe they're abusing their bodies,
Yeah.
right? They might not see it that way because it's a job, right? But at the same time, if someone has to really love them, how do they come out
How
of
do they
that frame
disengage?
of mind? Yeah.
I really do not know. I don't know what the answer is without the help of some sort of counseling intervention or spiritual intervention. I don't know how they get out of it. I know that women leave prostitution because we know of the great work Jabez House is doing, and Shamel, she's doing great work with Jabez House here in Barbados, helping women to transition from prostitution into, reputable jobs so that they can earn a living to assist themselves and their families. So we know that women do leave it behind, but the psychological trauma that it leaves, I do not know what it does, how they're able to navigate that without some sort of counseling intervention and spiritual intervention and prayer. And I believe that can all be a part of it. When you think of things that you yourself would have come out of, that you shared in our story, then, and you got to get the book to read it, but certainly Gabriel himself as a man who would have led a wild life, and you can read it in the book, before he was a Christian, and how that would have impacted him and his view of sex,
that's right,
until he became a Christian, and then having to navigate that differently. So these things are real, and they can have an impact on our marriages and on our relationships. And I think that the more we talk about these things and the more we bring them into the fore, the more we can get to a place where we can see that this is something that we need to deal with. But know that I mentioned the book before we get any further, because we have, everything that we have been looking at actions. But at the same time, we're going to still wrap it up there. But before we move on, we said we were going to give away a free copy of our book, Journey to One. So if anybody can tell me right now by putting it into the chat, when is our anniversary this year? What date is our anniversary, and how many years we will be celebrating? You're going to get a copy of Journey to One. We will make sure we get it to you. You can just DM me in Messenger and give me your contact information. I'll contact you and we'll arrange a delivery point. So if you can put here in the chat, how many years of marriage this year, and when our anniversary? We said it at the beginning.
Nadia.
Oh, all right, Nadia, you are on the money. All right, Nadia, so I will make sure that I get a copy to you.
So she could DM you.
Yeah, I know Nadia, so I can get it to her. Fine, okay. Nadia, thank you so much.